Well, I'm now joined by a living Australian national treasure, in my view, a man who commanded respect on both sides of the aisle when he was Deputy Prime Minister to John Howard, the former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, a leader of the National Party, and now something of a podcaster, broadcaster in his own right, John Anderson. John, wonderful for you to join us. How are you going?
I'm very well, Catherine. You've been too kind, but it's good to be with you, and I hope you're well. And good luck with your presentations over the next couple of weeks and beyond.
Well, I hope I can lift my game. I've been performing a bit like the Indian batting order tonight, but we're a bit clunky technically, but we'll get there. But look, thank you for taking time out. I realise you've had a big family week, haven't you? And you've got Christmas looming, but I could think of no finer person to talk to about Doug Anthony's pathing, because you held the leadership of the National Party and, like him, were a coalitionist during a very effective government. And just wondered if you'd share with viewers, because when you look at Doug's career, he lived to 90, but he hasn't been in politics for 37 years. Very few people probably recall him with any clarity. So what are your abiding memories of him? And did he reach out and mentor you or offer to be an elder statesman when you were leading the National Party?
Well, Doug Anthony, of course, was Deputy Prime Minister in total for some 10 years. He retired at the age of 54, which is 37 years ago. I think that maths is right, so he wasn't young.
Yes, that's correct.
He'd been in Parliament at that time for half of his life, which is extraordinary. Now, I think the thing about Doug was that, I mean, he was plainly a highly intelligent man. I'm just making sure my technology is right there. A highly intelligent man, a man who had a real grasp of issues. He was a courageous man. His courage in fronting farmers with unpopular news was something that really struck me when I was a university student, and I was studying in the government department of the University of Sydney a course called Energy and the Environment, topical today again. And at that Australia was artificially holding petrol prices low, petrol and diesel prices, very popular, of course, in Australia. But the result of it was that no one was exploring and refining capacity was being dropped. And the one thing that's worse than high fuel prices is not having it, or having it being unreliable. And Doug had the courage to go and say to farmers, we have to move to import parity if we're to get exploration and refining moving in this country. And it got us to 100% self-reliance. Now, of course, we're nowhere near, and we're much more exposed. But I admired his courage for it. It was part of the reason that I sort of eventually put my own paw up to try and have a go.
Okay.
He was a man, though, who, the other thing I think that's so important, he was a leader who set an example you'd be proud to follow in every way, including as a husband and a dad.
Yeah. I see he's survived by Margot, who is 89, and in one of the obituaries, apparently he'd promised her he'd leave politics at 50, and he felt that he'd welched by going to the age of 54, which is relatively young in today's terms, as you know, and that is another measure of the man. He went at a time of his own choosing, as you did, by the way, and most don't get to do that.
He did, and I was only just becoming involved with the party. And there was a National Party conference in Orange when he explained that he was going. And he referred to Margot as his Clementine, a reference, of course, to Clement Churchill. And she is, I have to say, an extraordinarily gracious and winsome person in her own right. And I can see why he referred to her as his Clementine. And I would say exactly the same of my own wife, Julia, who, it was a team act. I could never have done it without her. I don't think Doug could have done it without Margot.
John, I want to ask you something. Doug presided over the transformation from the Country Party to the National Party. And I grew up in a household where the Country Party was revered. Do you think that brand change has over time served the party well? Do you think it's lost a bit of its identity? You're a working farmer. I know there are still plenty in the party's ranks who have the sand under, the red soil under their fingernails. But Canberra's become a town of the bureaucratic class, and Doug was old school, as were you. Do you think we've lost something in that National Party identity, or do you think it was an inevitable move that had to be made?
I think the truth is that all political parties have faced the shrinking of their traditional bases. A lot fewer people now who would see themselves as working class and attracted to the Labor Party. The Liberal Party's base has shifted. It's now, its most common supporters are more likely to be tradies than they are people in the blue rent-set suburbs.
Sure.
For the National Party, look, it's a really difficult thing to come to grips with. As Doug himself used to point out, farming's become so efficient that the number of people employed in agriculture has just absolutely plummeted, and yet they perform this incredibly critical task. How do you get a voice for them when in politics the iron laws of arithmetic apply? You have to have numbers to have influence. We couldn't get the wind in our sails in the way that we might have, say, 80, 90 years ago from, in numbers terms, from farmers. It's no one's fault. It's the market. And the other thing that Doug used to say always troubled me, and it's absolutely right, it's become truer, not less so, since he used to observe it. The media age has transformed politics into something that's presidential. It becomes very hard when the focus is between the Prime Minister of the day and the would-be Prime Minister, and it's very hard to sort of get a similar contest going between, if you like, the deputies.
That makes abundant sense. Look, we've lost a great Australian, and I'm going to be talking to Kim Beazley later this week about Mike Jeffrey, whose passing has diminished us as well. But John, an important topic that we'll spend more time on next year, I hope, when I come back with my own program. But you're an observant Christian, and you and I both regard the 25th of December as more than a holiday. We both believe. And I've spoken to you a couple of times. You harbour grave concerns about the freedom of religion in Australia. You've talked about it on your podcast series. Jennifer Oriel's piece today, I guess, would have sounded very familiar from a podcast I think I heard you do with her some time ago. Do you think the government's going to honour its commitment to its core constituency on its freedom of religion legislation, or do you think they've actually lost their way? I'm getting the impression they're trying to please far too many people.
I have become, I'm afraid, I know they were well-intentioned, but we have no end of architecture and machinery around what are now painted as competing human rights. Well, yes, we conflict with one another over whose rights are paramount. And you get a whole lot of areas where actually there are clashes and somebody loses out. And it was always going to, I think, end in tears. I don't know that it is now possible to define everyone's rights without, in an environment where people won't exercise self-restraint and goodwill towards their neighbours. We've set up an arrangement that I think, sees us now all the time focusing on our rights, not on rubbing along and, dare I say it, loving our neighbour. I won't love my neighbour, I'll compete for his rights. So I'm not quite sure it's even possible. And I can honestly say to you, I don't think I've thought that it was possible for probably 20 years to sort these things out properly. We are in grave danger, let me spell this out, of living in a situation where the state will decide what is sacred and the courts will decide whether or not your beliefs are genuine. And we will be in a situation where the unravelling of what I think is the most fundamental freedom of all, which is freedom of conscience and freedom of belief, the unravelling of the genius of Western harmony, where those who held minority views were genuinely allowed to hold them because we respected them as individuals even if we didn't like their views. We don't do that anymore.
Yes.
We don't separate an individual from the views they hold. If they hold views that we don't like, that person is a bad person. And we've almost got to the point where we haven't thought this through properly. We're getting to the sort of situation Solzhenitsyn warned about. We think that there's a problem with evil in the world because there are evil people, so we've got to shut the evil people down. We've got to cancel them, get rid of them. That's fatal thinking, because the realistic world needs to know that we're a mixture of good and bad. None of us are perfect. once we get into the point where the technocrats and where the legal mechanism decides on matters of deep and profound belief and conscience, we're no longer free.
Well, John, well said, and it's a delight as always to speak to you. Thank you for joining us in what's been a week where you've had to sustain a personal loss, and I know you've got some family commitments as well, and also the forthcoming feast that we'll celebrate. So God bless you and your family, and have a happy, holy Christmas, and I'm sure we'll talk about this topic further in the new year, because I, like you, believe not only is it fundamental to our constitutional rights, but some sense of the sacred is absolutely essential to a civil society of the type we wish to or we aspire to run in Australia. So thank you for your time, and best to the family for Christmas.
Good to be with you, and I wish you all the very best for a safe and happy and holy Christmas as well.
Thank you, John.